For the final topic of the day, we have Greg Hardy, who appeared on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani. He is getting into MMA now. There were some interesting points in that interview that I wanted to go over. The first one is when he was asked whether or not he would stop his MMA dreams for football. He pretty much admitted, yes, I'm still very much into football. If I get an opportunity, I'll take it. And that makes sense. He's a football player. You have a very limited window for football. He's going to make a lot more money in the NFL. The NFL minimum salary would be a fantastic salary for a UFC heavyweight. It's much higher. So you can't blame him if he delays his career on that. There were some reports that Antonio Bigfoot Silva, who he trains with at ATT, was saying that he thinks in a year he could be UFC ready. The UFC heavyweight division right now, and really the heavyweight division in MMA, it's not great. If you look at who the top prospects are right now, you're looking at Derek Lewis, who guy has great knockout power, but he's not the most technical guy. He's actually underrated with his boxing, but his all-around game, he's not very technical on the ground. His wrestling isn't the most technical. Doesn't really throw a ton of kicks. Doesn't really use his kicks that well. Doesn't necessarily play the range game that well, but he's able to use his power. You have Francis Ngannou, who, again, physical freak, but is he a fantastic technical striker? Not really. Is he a fantastic wrestler? I mean, he's strong, but if you're looking at his technique, not really. His jiu-jitsu, again, he's able to rip people's arms and kind of use that He-Man strength, but he's not the most flowy, he's not the most technical, but again, he's such a physical freak. He's able to do a lot of stuff despite a lack of technique. So I haven't seen Greg Hardy train. I don't know where he's at. Obviously, he's very new to it. He said he's been doing it for about 3 months, so he'll develop some technique. He'll get some timing down. It's possible that a guy like him could be very successful. Obviously, to dominate in the NFL at a defensive end, there's a lot of athleticism. There's a lot of explosion that goes into that to be able to get off the line, pushed by a 300-plus pound lineman who just needs to hold you back for 5 or 6 seconds. That's impressive. So there's a real chance that if he trains hard, if he really gets into it, and if this is something that's natural to him, he could eventually become a Francis Ngannou type where he's getting by with his strength, his athleticism, and his explosion while he continues to develop his skills. But the problem that he's got, obviously, is that whole domestic violence thing. He was not terribly candid in his interview. It was a lot of, oh, I apologize for what I've done in the past, but then when Ariel would ask him specifically what he did in the past, he'd say he really didn't do much. It's hard to say whether he's actually amended. You know, we've obviously had guys in the past like John Jones where they've had their indiscretions, and you'll hear them in interviews, and they can play it well where, oh, you know, that was the old me. I'm good now. I'm a changed man. I made some mistakes in the past, but I've learned. John Jones is more convincing to me than what Greg Hardy was. So for him to be successful, he's already got the stigma of being a woman beater. That's going to be very difficult for him. He's going to have to be very valuable to get into an organization like the UFC or Bellator because of that alone. So that's working against him. But he's also going to have to be very clean from now on. He's not going to be able to get in trouble with the law anymore. He's not going to be able to get in trouble over drugs, not going to be able to get in trouble over any sort of violence, domestic violence, whether it's even fighting people in a club. You can't be doing that at this point. He has to stay clean. So for him to actually become a real prospect in the sport, there's a lot that's going to be ahead of him. He's really got to love MMA. He's got to be training constantly. He's got to be coming in there to learn. And he's got to have an open mind. He's going to be able to outmuscle a lot of guys in the gym. If he does that in training, it's going to work against him. He needs to be open to the techniques. And if he tries to train from a technical approach and he can kind of combine his athleticism with a more technical approach, he really can be great. But again, do I think he's going to be able to stay out of trouble with the law between now and however many fights it takes before the UFC starts looking at him? I don't know. I don't think so. I think he's going to be given some tough guys early on. I don't even think he's going to make it undefeated through his first 5 fights. I think he'll lose at least one. And if you're the UFC, it's really going to be tough because they don't want to start getting involved with people who are well-known women beaters. They had their problems in the past with Cody East. They've had other guys who weren't in trouble at the time, but after they left the UFC, they got in trouble with domestic violence. If you're the UFC, I mean, it's going to take a lot for Greg Hardy to get to the point where they can actually bring him in and be able to say, yes, we're going to take a hit from a PR standpoint for the fact that we're bringing in a guy who's a known woman beater who is known for throwing his girl on a bed full of guns. But if I'd have to say because of that, as much as it'd be crazy to imagine a stud NFL defensive end getting into MMA, I don't think Greg Hardy is going to be the guy that goes straight from the NFL and has a successful career. There may be some other guys who come over. There are a lot of guys who have had fairly short careers, a lot of guys who are very athletic, but maybe just don't make it to NFL superstardom that can still be great. Those kind of guys still have a chance to come into this game and be very successful, but I don't think Greg Hardy, given his baggage, is going to be a successful UFC fighter. So that closes this week's edition of the MMA Rundown. Next week we'll be going over the results of the fights that we had this weekend. We'll also be going over some of the news that comes up. I'm sure there'll be some stories that'll come up between now and then. And we'll also be going over some of the other fights that are upcoming. There have been some new fights that have been announced, such as Eddie Wineland versus John Dotson, that are very interesting. So we'll cover all that. We'll cover some more interesting stories. And we've also got the NCAA Wrestling Championships coming up. So we'll talk about who I think is going to win at each weight class, who at each weight class has the potential to transfer over to MMA, and much, much more. So I'll see you guys all then.